Next, from the Standard Club in Chicago, we hear an address by State Comptroller Judy Baar Topinka. The comptroller talks about the problems her department has in catching up on past due bills despite a recent surge in tax revenues. She also talks about the coming end of the last tax increase and what the loss of $5 billion a year would mean for the state's ability to pay its bills. This runs about 45 minutes.
Swearing in as governor of the state of Illinois. Do you remember this? Okay. Now, our organization truly is bipartisan, and our board of directors bears it out. Stephen SCHNORF, who's going to be introducing Judy Baar Topinka today, was the director of the Bureau of the Budget under Governors Edgar and Ryan. So the only Republican game in town during that inaugural ceremony was Judy Baar Topinka's. She was the only Republican constitutional officer. She was treasurer at the time. I had never met her. So I went through, you know, those long receiving lines you have to go through when you meet a constitutional officer. I go through that line, and I'm standing what's like eons, and I finally get to the treasurer. I say, "Hi, Madam Treasurer, my name is..." She grabs my hand, says, "I know who you are. You're Ralph MARTIRE. You're from that Center for Tax and Budget group, right?" I said, "Yes, Madam Treasurer, I am." She goes, "I've read some of your columns. Do you really mean what you say, or are you full of it?" I mean what I say, Madam Treasurer, I do. She goes, "Well, you claim to be bipartisan. Will you work with me? I'm a good Republican." I said, "Yes, ma'am, I will." "All right. Well, I'm going to tell you what I want to work on, and I'm going to inform you on the 3 different things and who's responsible for it, and we're going to get right to it." I said, "Well, thank you very much." Walked off thinking that was odd. And that was on a Sunday evening. The inaugural parties are. Monday is the inauguration. Tuesday, I get back into my office. I have an email from 7 a.m. directly from Judy Baar Topinka, the treasurer of the state of Illinois. "Ralph, here are the 5 things I want to work on with your organization. Here are the people in my office who are responsible for them. If they don't contact you by tomorrow, you call me and we'll get it done." Judy. How many constitutional officers are that approachable, that willing to work with people on substance right from the get-go? So I've always had a soft spot in my heart for Madam Topinka, and I just had to say that before she's officially introduced by Stephen SCHNORF, our director. Stephen?
Hi, I am Steve SCHNORF, and I am glad to be here today, and I'm so glad you are all here today. I have the very pleasant task of introducing someone now. I don't think anyone here today will top Kathy and Senator Cullerton. Judy and I did not go to high school together. I think she was pre-kindergarten when I was in high school. But I have known her a long time. I met her when she was a reporter for the Suburban Life newspapers, about 1974, I would say, and have been, have had the honor of having a relationship with her since that time. Most of you, I suspect in here at one time or another, have met Judy. If you haven't met her, you've seen her on television. You know she is not the cut-and-dried, aloof, pontificating, vague public official that we sometimes get in situations like this. As I said, it's an honor for me to introduce Judy. She has a record, I think, that speaks for itself. She's a graduate of Northwestern University. She was elected state representative in 1980. She was elected state senator in 1984. She was elected state treasurer in 1994, 1998, 2002, and was elected state comptroller in 2010. She's the first woman elected Illinois state treasurer, the first woman re-elected to a statewide constitutional office, the first woman to be elected to 2 different state constitutional offices. She's living proof that you don't have to be a radical right-winger to win elections in the state of Illinois as a Republican. She has led the Republican ticket in total votes received each time she's been on the ballot statewide. And I don't think you will hear her spouting some of the vileness and negativism that you frequently hear from one wing of my Republican Party. It is my honor to introduce to you and to welcome here today State Comptroller Judy Baar Topinka.
Well, now, that was quite an introduction. We only forgot one in there. You know, I've held 2 constitutional offices. I did try for 3, if any of you recall, and we would have saved a lot of money had I won. Let me tell you, that would have been a very great help to our budget right then and there. But it really, I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you for just a nice warm welcome, and to follow John Cullert. And I have to tell you, I really like John very much. In spite of his being a Democrat, it's okay. It's okay. He's just misguided. But, you know, one way or another, and I'm only teasing, because John and I go back in the legislature. I come from the legislature. We've gone through the House to the Senate together and so on, and have a very good working relationship all the way around. It pleases me that we have found much in common, in that we were able to work on bills together. Some we have fought out. He has a tendency to take out these goody-goody bills, and I just hate them. You know, motorcycle helmets and smoking tax, trying to tax them out of existence, and you know, seat belts, all that kind of stuff. I don't care for that kind of stuff. I think that just violates. I'm more independent and more libertarian on that front. I think people, when they're old enough, ought to take care of themselves, and government ought to just butt out. But at the same time, I can truly say that our high water, in my opinion, was when we were able to literally sneak a little something in, because I don't think we could have passed it on its own. It was so unpopular. And you may still find it unpopular. But John and I were able to pass legislation which said that everyone had to do jury service. They had to show up. When we got there were 26 groups that were exempt. And all that left for this, quote, jury of your peers was the old, the sick, and those without any clout. And so as a result, you know, I kept getting these elderly people in my office, many of them, you know, who had problems like bladder control and now had been asked 15 times to go for jury duty because they couldn't find anybody else. So now everybody has to go. And again, it's not real popular with a lot of people, but you know what? It's the basis of a democracy. It's the only thing our Constitution really asks of us. And I figure if it's good enough for me to go, it's good enough for you to go too. So that's where we're at. So it goes, you know. But I was happy to see the finish line here at the end of another grueling legislative session, though it ended rather early at 8 p.m. Everybody threw up their hands and went home. And I certainly can't imagine the relief that Senator Cullerton felt. With this august group, because you're a very smart group. John kind of intimated, you know, we'll talk to nice groups, but they're not quite as adept on all these issues as you are. So you are somewhat intimidating. Though I must admit that 2 weeks ago, I was able to give a version of this speech at Baylor University, where my son, who is in the United States Army and about to retire after 20 years, roped me into a speech in the course that he is teaching for the Army on healthcare law and ethics. And we take that pretty seriously in our family. So I was feeling pretty good on that, and it was the same type of group. They were very, very bright people, brilliant people, and that's what I consider all of you to be as well. So it is somewhat intimidating. Steve SCHNORF and I do go back together. We did not go to school together because I went to a girls' school. And that ended that right away. Although you will still find gentlemen around the state of Illinois who will swear that they went to school with me at 3 different high schools, none of which I attended. And that doesn't count the ones who say they're either related to me, and I'm an only child, so that's pretty limiting right there. And then the other ones who said they dated me, and always being kind of a dork, I really didn't date that much. So as a result, very limiting. But I have found my little spot here and really enjoy the work we do in fiscal matters, even though sometimes you get up in the morning and you think, my God, how are we going to get through another day of this? Because it is so difficult being the chief fiscal officer of what is basically a bankrupt state. And you know, if we could declare bankruptcy, we would. Or, you know, it's just that bad. Of course, Fitch has just lowered our credit rating again. That'll be the 13th lowering of a credit rating in 4 years. That's just awful. I mean, it's just embarrassing. Having worked with Ralph MARTIRE, I have to tell you, he is a jewel. I love it every time he comes into my office. And he does describe the situation of how we first met and started working on fiscal issues together. I really enjoy working with him. I like the fact that your group comes together and really pays attention to what is the bedrock here of Illinois and how we are suffering because of things that have gone on over probably a period of 30, 40 years. This did not happen overnight. But he really pays attention, he knows what he's talking about, and it is a delight to have him in the office. Now, before we get into all the fun of all this just completed legislative session and the fiscal mess that our state finds itself in, I do want to let you know that I appreciate the information you provide, the delivery analysis, so your staff work does not go to waste. We just eat it up. And the awareness that you provide for the public, because this is not a glamorous issue. It doesn't make for easy headlines. It doesn't make for easy explanations. And so the public at large really needs a little bit of help in moving along here to understand what's going on in a budgetary system which, as Senator Cullerton alluded to, is not necessarily the most transparent of budgetary processes, and does have these little side accounts that doesn't all come together in a very unified budget. So when I hear that a budget is balanced in the state of Illinois, I kind of snicker because it's really never balanced. And there's always these little side accounts. Congress does it too. It's just ways of getting around the real budgeting, and that's what we wind up with, and that also helped us get into trouble. So, even more than that, you know, the CTBA, I think, takes the next step of talking about how we can make things better and of actually offering solutions. And I really do appreciate that, because we are bombarded daily with telephone calls with individuals, corporations, non-for-profits in the state of Illinois because of late payments and things of this sort. So it is difficult. And yet you offer solutions rather than just complaining, and I just appreciate that very much. You know, at this point, we've got enough people pointing out our state's problems, so we need more groups like yours that really get into it and help us try and work things out. Now, obviously, the topic of the day is the recent legislative session and how it fares for Illinois. Needless to say, we were watching it very, very carefully. I'm sure you've heard and read the analysis in recent days from pundits, columnists, editorial boards, and others that are downright apocalyptic here about what did and didn't happen. I don't know if it's true, but I heard that the Chicago Tribune editorial board is now building an ark. Right? And if the rain falls, we'll be able to launch it. You know, I mean, unreal. In fairness, there are certainly concerns that we'll get to, but there are also some accomplishments I think worth highlighting. The General Assembly passed what is being called the Economic Development Act of 2013, which includes giving the go-ahead to a new arena and a hotel at McCormick Place as part of a larger effort to attract more visitors, conventions, and dollars to the lakefront. So I congratulate Senator Toy Hutchison, I see her out there, who is a special favorite of mine, who is on your panel today, for getting that done. Now, I do believe that there's a straw horse hiding in there somewhere for a casino, you know, and I throw that out there. You don't have to answer it, Toy, but I've always supported a casino for Chicago, not necessarily the way it was coming through the factory here in the legislature, but you know, that may very well be what's going on, and I'm not the only one saying it. Democrats and Republicans also agreed on a concealed carry legislation before a court-mandated deadline for addressing the issue, and approved a bill that balances safety concerns with our Second Amendment right to bear arms. Okay, couldn't come together on a pension, but we got together on concealed carry. I think that's kind of an interesting little sidelight to all this. Lawmakers approved a medical marijuana law to show compassion for our sick, gave the go-ahead to fracking in the hopes of fueling new jobs and economic development in Southern Illinois. So we do have now medical marijuana, which will make us feel better if we don't have the money to pay our bills. And we can just go and be fracked out in Southern Illinois. I hope the water is good when we get through with all that. Now, members get a gold star from me for rejecting a request, and I really couldn't believe this. I found it stunning. A request from the Chicago Public Schools to take a pension holiday. A pension holiday. We're already in the hole, and we come up with a bill at the end of session for another pension holiday. We somehow don't watch the history of the state of Illinois, and we should know by now that pension holidays are a recipe for disaster. It's one of the things that got us in this mess. So there are some things to feel good about. But of course, we've got some outstanding issues. After it looked like the marriage equality vote was imminent, the House delayed action to allow members more time. Sadly, it comes down to politics. Candidates want to see if they have a primary before taking such a controversial vote. You know, you get elected to make decisions, and a decision should have been made that night. Frankly, it could have been a historical decision, and sadly, it was not. And, you know, we are one nation of laws. That apparently is not working very well in Illinois. So I'm hoping we'll revisit that issue and do the right thing. And I think we had another stutter step on, well, you know, it's just not fair. It's just not fair. If you just want to talk basic fairness, which I've always held as a guide, just not fair. So anyway, we had another stutter stop on gaming expansion. Yeah, we're going to make all this money, and that's going to settle all our problems. And the early session momentum started waning in the final days. And once again, the issue is going to have to wait for another day, because you know, Gaming Board Chairman Jaffe has suggested that a Chicago casino be subject to the same oversight as existent in other casinos. Now, there's a novel twist, huh? I think he's right. You know, it should not get special consideration. A casino is a casino is a casino and ought to be run like that. And no special deals there. But that's my humble opinion. And then there's the elephant in the room, pension reform. Now, of course, it's incredibly frustrating that another session has come and gone without resolution. But it's important that this be done right and not just passed so it can be done, declared as done. This is a touchy issue. A lot of people's lives depend upon it. And I'm not going to scapegoat a bunch of state employees or teachers or folks who really and truly give of their time and talents for not the greatest amount of money, and then hope that they're going to have some kind of a financial underpinning that many have already planned on because of the situation as it was. I'm not about to throw them under the bus because it's much easier to take a meat axe out there and try and rip this thing up. It needs to be handled, you know, slowly and gently and with forethought, because it does affect the lives of just about everybody in the state of Illinois. And so it worries me that if there's a rush to judgment here, that we do get it right. You know. Well, and that's not to make you feel good. That's literally how I feel. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that I felt that the Cullerton proposal was a fairer proposal than the Madigan proposal. And if somehow the pieces of those could come together where we could take the good from both of these and compromise and maybe get something going, well, I'm going to have to leave that to the legislature, but that's going to have to be the way to go. It will be. And I think it will provide some fairness. But what impressed me about the Cullerton proposal was the push toward constitutionality. You know, there's no sense putting a bill out there that's going to go to court and get thrown out, and we're going to start at square one again, and at $17 million a day going into our unfunded liability. It's just going to give me gray hair under all that hair dye. So please, you know, you just need some time here. Sometimes I think people forget that we have this pesky clause in our state constitution that protects pension benefits from being diminished. So if benefits are changed, and obviously there needs to be something done, there needs to be a trade-off or a consideration for public employees. And I think that might work. If we overlook the fact of that constitutionality, then why have a constitution? That's for starters. Again, the court situation. And finally, you know, what just drives me crazy, I have people in Illinois who find all these things in other states on Google and whatever, and they send them and say, see what Rhode Island has done. Oh, this is just terrific. Well, it's not in Rhode Island's constitution. We have a very unique situation here. You know, if I didn't say anything that worthwhile, really. I mean, it's just not that good yet. Just wait. I'm building up to it, okay? Then you'll get the Ralph MARTIRE number, you know, I mean, it'll be all good. But there are so many other states who've been able to deal with the pension situation because it is not in their state constitution. It's state law. You can make state law, you can break state law. It's a little harder to get constitutional amendments to come and go. And you can imagine that at the Constitutional Convention of 1970, which enacted this phrase, this discussion came up and there was a desire of protection for employees of the state of Illinois. And that's why it got there in the first place. So it's going to have to be dealt with, but again, I think it has to be dealt with honorably and gently and not with a meat axe. I really hate meat axe approaches to things because they're things that are not negotiated out, where all parties participate and we come up with the common good. Sometimes I think we forget about the common good, and that is not in my game plan here. So when I backed President Cullerton's plan by pulling all the parties together and working collaboratively, I think he produced a pretty good compromise. Now, it doesn't make as much money in savings as the Madigan plan does. And I think the Madigan plan, you know, there a lot of work went into that. No one should take it lightly because people did try very hard to salvage the most amount of money out of pension plans and writing what could be just a wholesale pension problem for us. But I think this kind of started us on the road to compromise. And while the bill is not perfect, and none of these are, it saved a significant amount of money, and it addressed the little detail of being constitutional. That at the end of the line, we'd have something. We would not be forced to go to square one. Now, unfortunately, that bill never went to the House floor. I do believe if it had to the House floor, it would have passed overwhelmingly, that there would have been a pension reform bill in our hands as the legislature walked out the door. It did pass the Senate, stalled in the House. And I think it continues to give us the best chance of getting our pension systems back on track. Yes, John Cullerton is a policy wonk, but he's taken the time to move this along in an orderly fashion to get something done. Now, we need to get it done. There's no question about it. Remember, 17 million a day. As we sit here today, we're racking up another 17 million. Yesterday, Fitch downgraded us to an A-. You can figure that before long, that the other two rating agencies will come along for the ride as well. So when you put it all together, I would give the General Assembly an incomplete. Not an A or an F, but an incomplete. And hopefully the folks that were either unable to vote for something or does not get it together to vote for something, hopefully they will now calm down, get their brains in order, and start making it happen. I think it's worth noting that all that unfinished work becomes more difficult from here on out because May 31st was not only the end of the legislative session, but the symbolic start of the political season. We had one candidate already announced for governor within 48 hours of the end of session. And others are expected to follow in the weeks ahead. So the elbows are already starting to fly because this one's going to get pretty ugly. It's very sad. I'd like to think it'd be a little more civil, but having been in some ugly ones myself, I can tell you they're not nice, and this one's not going to be nice. So moving forward, when we talk about pensions and gaming, marriage and the like, it's going to be viewed against a backdrop of political jockeying, which further complicates matters. You'd like to think that people would vote for the highest desires that they have for the good of the order. Not necessarily. We all like our political careers. But even more than any of those specific issues, as controller, I worry about Illinois' larger approach to budgeting and spending. As many of you know, the state had $1.3 billion more in tax revenue than expected this spring as residents and businesses made moves to take advantage of the 2012 federal tax rates. And I can't tell you the number of people in Springfield that asked how we could spend that money or where the General Assembly should appropriate new dollars. And it was eye-opening to say the least. I took every opportunity to deliver a reality check. We use every available dollar to pay down the state's bill backlog. And in fact, that tax season allowed us to take the bill from $8.5 billion on April 1st to about $5.8 billion today. Now, how can we all get excited about $5.8 billion today? Yay, rah! Only in Illinois can a backlog of $5.8 billion be a wonderful, exciting thing because we're always so darn much in the hole. Something like this is almost exciting, you know. But as I've told all others, this is an improvement. Okay, it's nice. But there's no extra dollars out there lying around. I don't have a big pile of money sitting in the controller's office just waiting to be spent by the legislature or anybody else. Illinois is the only state in the nation with $5.8 billion in unpaid bills right now. And it didn't stop the General Assembly from hiking up the state budget by about $2 billion to a total of $35.4 billion this spring. They were spending it. They were spending it, and I don't have it in the office because we're paying it out. So if it's got to be spent, the majority went for education, which is a good thing, but I can't back it up with money. That's the only problem. It sounds nice, but I can't back it up with money. Now, a lot of that increase is for not only education, but human services. And I appreciate that because golly knows between the Medicaid cuts and the way we've cut education over the years, which is a horrible thing because this is our next generation, and those kids only have one shot at it. You know, they're not waiting around for us to make decisions. They're growing up and going through the system. The money is just not there to back up the commitment, and we're going to just be digging in a little deeper. Even more galling, the General Assembly included $500 million for earmarks. Well, you know, how's that? Earmarks, that's a fancy word, you know, for just pork. Pork. We had enough money for pork. Come on, you know, there's kids out there, there's sick people out there, there's old people out there. We've cut them till they can't see straight, but we got money for pork. Come on. If we can't afford the services we're providing, how do we justify funding special projects? It just doesn't make any sense. And as I've gone around the state, I said, look, just because you got money, don't you go going all hog wild on me. Keep the budget flat. Don't add anything. Don't start any new programs because you haven't paid for the old ones yet. Worry about paying your bills, because that is what our credit rating is based on. That's what our state needs to do so we can once again hold our head high and not be embarrassed in the greater world. It was funny going down to Texas, where my son is stationed and speaking at Baylor, and having people ask about Illinois. They're quite stunned about how we operate. And I said, well, that must be true because you sent your goofy governor up here to try and steal our jobs. Why don't you just tell him to stay home, because you're not doing so well either. Look at your education system. And then I proceeded to go down a whole line, and they quieted it down. They quieted it down. And he's still goofy, all right? Yeah. Now, as a state, we need to operate with a unified understanding that even if revenue increases, and it will from time to time, we cannot afford to bump up spending. So you're still going to have to make cuts. There's just no question, and you're going to have to keep things flat. You have homes, you have businesses. Do you spend what you don't have? What's not to understand here? Don't dig us a deeper hole. What's the first rule of getting out of a hole? Stop digging. We're digging. The shovels are out. So as a state, we need to operate with a unified understanding that we cannot afford to bump up spending at this time. Maybe down the road a piece, but not yet. Along the same lines, we need to change our budgeting process to reflect reality and not our hopes and our dreams. Everybody's watched enough reality shows. It's time for the real McCoy, and we need to face up to it right now. We've seen it happen time and time again with child care providers, programs for the developmentally disabled, and other human services. The governor signs a budget that is declared balanced. And you know what happens in reality? Programs and agencies are underfunded with the promise of being dealt with later. That later comes when appropriations run out early in the spring. A crisis is created, public pressure mounts, and ultimately a supplemental spending bill is passed. Supplemental means outside the budget. This was not accounted for. Suddenly we're adding something. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're plugging holes. We're doing bad things again with money. This year's supplemental bills totaled more than $1.8 billion. And that's money on top of the budget. It's fun when you're budgeting like this and can play with it like this. Yeah, we need more transparency, that's for sure. Now, in no way to do business, it's not the way to do business, and it's certainly a game playing here that we've helped dig us into this hole, because it gave us money to do lots of little projects that we like, and it makes people look good politically. And then we kick the can down the road, that old can, it's still going down there, and we still haven't stopped it. In fact, we're now 3 years into the biggest tax increase in state history, and one could argue that on the whole, our fiscal situation has not improved at all, and in some cases, it's worse. Now, the folks who've been budgeting using that tax increase, they've been using it as if it were real money. Well, it's not real money. It's funny money. It's borrowed money. It's money that's temporary. Remember the promise? It's temporary. It means it's going to go away. But it has been counted into the budget as if this is our money, lock, stock, and barrel. When if the legislature is going to live up to its feelings that it should live up to its contract and promise that it should withdraw this money, it stopped the 2% tax that we got, it's going to leave a tremendous hole the size of a Grand Canyon. Now, I really do think that we have to live up to our promises. We've already got promises that are being broken with employees and pension plans and so on. Now we're looking at this tax increase that was out there temporarily. We might consider looking at what President Preckwinkle and the Cook County Board did when she had a percentage of a sales tax to get rid of and promised she'd get rid of it. Why not whack at it a little bit at a time? But start the processes now so that suddenly when this thing is due, we're not going to have that big old hole. So that's what it means. If Illinois cannot afford to lose sight of the urgency of getting our fiscal house in order, our budgets are going to have to stay as lean as possible, with any extra revenue going toward unpaid bills, first and foremost. And we have to knock off the budget number games that only hurt us in the long run. Because ultimately our state's woes begin and end with finances. We have the assets, the abilities, the labor force, just about everything that makes a great state. So why aren't we great? And it's all about finances. And I think you have to keep an open mind legislatively and our office as fiscal officer as to what our tax structure is like. And maybe we should start talking about it really seriously to do a little house cleaning. So Ralph, I think you're going to have to come into the office again and we're going to have another sit down and start looking at what the possibilities are. And I would hope that our congressional delegation would start that process as well, because our income tax, our federal income tax situation, the IRS, well, I know I told my crew they're having a managers meeting today, and I said, you're not going to get motivational speakers, not after the IRS. With time to clean that place up, time to clean up our mess as well. So I look forward to working with you to making that happen, keeping in mind that we're never going to solve all our problems in a single legislative session, no matter how successful it is. So thank you again, and I'd now be happy to take any questions. Oh, I should probably give you one parting shot. We today have 53,925 unpaid bills at the Comptroller's office, totaling $3.4 billion, and they date back to May 3rd. So we're actually buzzing along pretty well. Now, when you include estimates of bills at agencies, the backlog reaches $5.8 billion. On April 1st, we had $8.5 billion in unpaid bills dating back to December 3rd. By August, we expect the backlog to be back at about $7.5 billion. Thank you very much.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.